Hi everybody. I am going to talk about the problems of persons with disability. It is a well-known fact that the disability as a human condition in an individual tends to affect his or her social interaction with the society. This may be either through physical or environmental barriers. The International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health defines disability as an umbrella term for impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. Disability is the interaction between individuals with a health condition such as cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, depression, and personal and environmental factors such as negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation and public buildings, and limited social support. Disability is complex, and the interventions required to overcome the disadvantages of disability are multiple, systematic, and will therefore vary depending on the context. The people with disability are the most disadvantaged category of the community who encounter with serious economic, educational, and social difficulties. Besides, stigmatization, poverty, and joblessness also add to their main problems. The persons with disabilities are unfortunately counted as a dependent and burdensome category of people in the community. Expressing negative attitude towards the disabled and labeling them with wounding words such as crazy, lame, idiot, and so on are quite common in the mainstream society. Most of the families count the presence of a disabled person in the family as a matter of shame and curse. The exclusion of persons with disability from the mainstream community stems out from the indifference shown by the family or community towards them. The society, therefore, needs to be sensitized on the problems of the disabled persons, which are physical, psychological, social, educational, and economic in nature. At the end of this talk, you may understand the different aspects of problems of persons with disability, gain adequate knowledge about the impact of disabling conditions on the life of individuals, and learn that disabling barriers or environmental factors that restrict the participation of people with a disability. Let me outline the physical problems of the persons with a disability. People with disability seek more health care than the people without disability and have greater unmet needs. Health promotion and preventive aspects seldom target people with disability. People with disability are particularly vulnerable to deficiencies in services such as healthcare, rehabilitation, or support and assistance. Depending on the severity of impairment in a person with disability, they experience greater vulnerability to secondary conditions, comorbid conditions, age-related conditions, engaging in health risk behavior, and high rate of premature death. The secondary conditions such as urinary tract infections, pressure, pain, and ulcers may occur in a person with disability in addition to and are related to a primary health condition and are both predictable and therefore preventable. Comorbid conditions such as the prevalence of diabetes with schizophrenia may occur in a person with disability in addition to and are related to a primary health condition associated with disability. Such conditions are higher among persons with disabilities than the general population. Age-related conditions refer to the aging process for some group of people with a disability, which may begin earlier than usual. Among the persons with developmental disabilities, the signs of premature aging tend to begin even during the age of 30s and 40s. Mortality rate for people with disability varies depending on the health condition. However, an investigation in the United Kingdom found that people with mental health disorders and intellectual impairments had a lower life expectancy. Some studies have indicated that people with a disability have higher rate of risky behavior such as smoking, poor diet, and physical inactivity. People with disability encounter a range of barriers when they attempt to access health care. Let me mention some of the barriers to health care for the disabled. Persons with a disability find their medical cost prohibitive. Lack of affordability of health services and transportation are two main reasons for persons with a disability not receiving the needed health care, particularly in low-income countries where availability of services is also very limited. The lack of appropriate services for people with disability is a significant barrier to health care. For example, a research in the states of Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu found that after the medical cost, the lack of services in the area was the second most significant barrier to health care. Persons with disability experience some physical barriers. Uneven access to buildings such as hospitals, health centers, inaccessible medical equipment, narrow doorways, internal steps, inadequate bathroom facilities, and inaccessible parking areas create barriers to healthcare facilities. Another important barrier to avail health facility is the inadequate skills and knowledge of the health workers. According to a study, people with disability are likely to find the skills of the healthcare providers inadequate to meet their needs more than twice than the non-disabled persons, 4 times more likely to report being treated badly, and nearly 3 times more likely to report being denied care. Let me discuss about the psychological problem of persons with disability. Much of research seems to emphasize the role that negative emotions play in the psychology of the disabled people and how this may affect the way in which they experience their physical impairment. Depression seems to be commonly associated with a physical impairment. The research study of Dennis reveals how emotional distress affects a person's level of impairment, and another researcher, Hansen, suggests that the severity of an individual's impairment is linked to his or her mental state. This seems to move towards an assumption that the level of impairment is intrinsically linked to an individual's emotional and cognitive characteristics. This focus on subjective qualities maintains a traditional focus on the individual as deficient, which minimizes the need for change on an institutional or social level, as well as overlooking any contextual or societal factors affecting the level of impairment. Also, much of the research relied upon professionals' assessments of the participants, which seems to place them as passive subjects. Recommendations were often made to change the individual's way of behaving or thinking in order to facilitate improvement or rehabilitation. Let me now describe the social problems of person with a disability. Social isolation emerged as an important issue confronting people with a disability. For some, the barriers in the built environment limit their ability to participate fully in the community life. The barriers are social for some and attitudinal for some other, and they have proved the most difficult to overcome. Particularly, people with an intellectual disability struggle for meaningful engagement with the community. Powerful taboos around relationships and intimacy still hamper the ability of people with an intellectual disability to make meaningful connections and enjoy the same rights as others in the community. As a result, they are among the most isolated groups. Let me mention about the lack of public services and support. Disability services are specialized services targeted at people with disabilities and their families, friends, and care providers. They can be distinguished from services that are available to the general public, which may or may not be accessible to people with disabilities. Disability services are intended to provide the disabled people with the assistance that they need to participate fully in daily and community life. Services such as mobility support, training on using aids and appliances, activities of daily living skills, vocational skills, training and income generation projects are unavailable in the rural regions, or unaffordable, or of such poor quality and of little benefit. Let me outline the barriers to the persons with a disability in the society. The barriers in the society can be mainly classified into two: the environmental and attitudinal barriers. The major environmental barriers are of two types: architectural and communication. Architectural barriers refer to the buildings which lack the ramps, railings, signage, braille print, adequate spacing, slip-resistant flooring, accessible toilets and chairs, switches, shelves, wash basins, taps, and telephone at an accessible height. If public buildings have these infrastructural facilities, they will be helpful to the disabled people to be at ease and do their routine with a minimum or no support. Apart from becoming self-reliant, such an internal atmosphere boosts their self-confidence and avoids unnecessary delay. In public places also, there is a need for ramps and handrails, curb ramps in pavements, seats, taps, telephone booths, wash basins at an accessible height, braille print, road signals with adequate timing, audio-visual announcements, and usage of bright colors, space for wheelchair users, accessible parking space, sign language, slip-resistant grab bars and flooring, modified play area or equipments, and rules. After all, it is a right of the disabled people to be included in all walks of life, and is not possible without an accessible or barrier-free environment. The Persons with Disability Act 1995 provides for a barrier-free environment in all public places and a barrier-free transport system. Communication is another area which is not sufficiently focused on. People having communication barriers are the ones who face a lot of hardships in socialization. At present, communication is bound within languages and speech. In reality, much more communication can happen in silence. There is an inappropriate school of thought stating that people with communication disabilities cannot communicate or do not know to communicate. The fact is reverse. Anyone and everyone communicates in a day-to-day living, but the society that claims to be communicative or communicable does not bother to receive or understand what the disabled person is communicating. Major communication barriers in the society refer to the lack of readers, braille material, aid-related manuals, magazines, government orders, newspapers, and scribe facility for people with visual impairment, lack of sign language and sign language interpreters for people with hearing impairment, lack of communication aids and technical devices for people with severe disabilities, and a lack of importance to research on alternative and augmentative communication, which hinders a huge amount of human resource in contributing towards the development of the country. The areas that get affected due to these barriers include education and information leading to intellectual disability, employment leading to financial disability, play, leisure, and health leading to health issues, and all the above affecting the rights and contribution of the disabled people, leading to isolation from the society, affecting their self-esteem, sense of social respect and dignity of life, leading to an emotional disability and an all-round life of disability. Let me mention about the attitudinal barriers. The real issue behind these barriers is the insensitive attitude of the society towards the disabled. Even a stringent law can do very less unless there is a change in the mindset of people and a willingness to accept and respect people with disability. There is an attitude of relating a disabled person with his or her disability and not to his or her abilities. The society should be dynamic enough to accept all differences, as the world exists only because of its differences and the natural balance among them. It also becomes the duty of each member of the society to respect individuality and mutual rights of every member. The society should develop a right-based understanding to provide equal opportunities to the disabled people, whereby they can enjoy their rights and as well contribute to the society. All citizens should have the attitude to respect the contribution of the disabled people as they do their own. For such an attitudinal shift to happen, the society should believe in the disabled people and that they are like anybody else. Let me outline the educational needs of the persons with a disability. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan talks of education for all. The fact remains that many disabled people are not enrolled under the scheme due to the severity of disability. Also, teachers are not trained in inclusive education. It is a well-known fact that enrollment in mainstream school alone is not the answer. It is important for the education system to respond to the needs of people with disability. Even the integrated education system is catering only to mildly affected people. Whoever receives special education never gets standardized curriculum, and a very few reach up to college education or even 11th or 12th class. There is an immense need for the disabled-friendly curriculum and the examination system, which involves a variety of options and adaptations. There is a dire need to establish special schools, vocational training centers, special teacher education institutions in every nook and corner of our country, and extend support to include all persons with disabilities. More resources need to be allocated, and voluntary organizations need to be motivated to take up these responsibilities under the monitoring of the district disability rehabilitation officers, and regular services need to be offered for the purpose of including all children with disability. Resources need to be extended to voluntary organizations prompting such kind of activities, and empowerment of persons with disabilities needs to be improved. The results of a survey conducted in 320 universities and schools shows that only 0.1% of the disabled students are in universities and 0.5% in mainstream schools. Clearly, a great neglect prevails in the society. Let me now discuss the economic problems of persons with disability. A major problem disabled persons have is when it comes to financial independence. Indeed, most people with disability still rely on social security benefits for support, while the majority of them do not earn more than the minimum wage. They are dependent on their families, besides their choices of livelihood means being limited. The pension for the disability cannot realistically support persons with disability in their daily life. The economic support of the family of the people with disability remains an important element in their life, as they consider it as a source of essential support and assistance. Though this bond with the family is a positive thing, people with disability are prepared to pay for support and assistance to be able to be more independent and less of a burden to their families. Much has still to be done to balance the financial problems with the cost of services. Let me mention about the disabling barriers related to the state planning and public service system. The Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health both highlight the environmental factors that restrict participation for people with a disability. Inadequate policies and standards on the part of the state is a significant barrier to the life of the disabled persons. Policy design does not always take into account the needs of people with disability, or existing policies and standards are not strictly enforced. The lack of clear policy of inclusive education, lack of enforceable access standards in physical environments, and the prevailing low priority accorded to rehabilitation are some of the barriers. Resources allocated to implementing policies and plans are often inadequate. Strategy papers on poverty reduction, for instance, may mention disability but without considering funding. People with disabilities are particularly vulnerable to deficiencies in services such as healthcare, rehabilitation, or support and assistance. Issues such as poor coordination among services, inadequate staffing, staff competencies, and training affect the quality and adequacy of services for persons with a disability. Often, people with a disability are excluded from decision making in matters directly affecting their lives. A lack of rigorous and comparable data on disability and evidence on programs that are effective often impedes proper understanding and appropriate action. The negative attitudes on the part of the general public, healthcare providers, teachers and others pose a great barrier in general. In other words, beliefs and prejudices constitute barriers when healthcare workers cannot see beyond the disability, teachers do not see the value in teaching children with disability, employers discriminate against people with disability, and family members have low expectations of their relatives with disability. Let me sum up. The people with disability are the most disadvantaged category of the community who encounter the serious economic, educational and social difficulties. Besides, stigmatization, poverty and joblessness also add to their main problems. Disabled people are facing challenges in maintaining their financial stability, education, employability and their knowledge of information technology. People with disability seek more health care than the people without disability and have greater unmet needs. Lack of affordability of health services and transportation are two main reasons for persons with disability not receiving the needed health care, particularly in low-income countries where availability of services is also limited. Persons with disability experience some physical barriers. Level of impairment is intrinsically linked to an individual's emotional and cognitive characteristics. Services such as mobility support, training on using aids and appliances, activities of daily living skills, vocational skills, training and income generation projects are unavailable in the rural regions or unaffordable. The barriers in the society can be mainly classified into two: the environmental and attitudinal barriers. The major environmental barriers are of two types: architectural and communication. The real issue behind these barriers is the insensitive attitude of the society. Even a stringent law can do very less unless there is a change in the mindset of people and a willingness to accept and respect people with disability. There is an immense need for the disabled-friendly curriculum and examination system which involve a variety of options and adaptations. Indeed, most people with disability still rely on social security benefits for support, while the majority of them do not earn more than the minimum wage. Policy design does not always take into account the needs of people with disability, or existing policies and standards are not enforced. People with disabilities are particularly vulnerable to deficiencies in services such as health care, rehabilitation, or support and assistance. Often, people with disability are excluded from decision making in matters directly affecting their lives. A lack of rigorous and comparable data on disability and evidence on programs that are effective often impedes proper understanding and appropriate action. Let me sign off now and hope to see you in another session. Thank you.